us begin with a few updates and give me just one moment to get to the notes that I would like to share with you. Okay, here we go. And I think we've got everybody else we need on this call, so thank you so much. First of all, let's begin with some news. One moment, just one moment. Just our basic updates that we always like to share. And that is, gosh, I'm so sorry, having some trouble still. There we go. All right, as of today, Oklahoma has 4,201 positive cases of COVID-19. There has been 253 deaths, and currently hospitalized are 230. Just for some context, at this time 2 weeks ago, Oklahoma had 2,800 positive cases, 164 deaths, and we actually had 292 hospitalized. Let's talk about graduation ceremonies. I want to reiterate my comments from the last call regarding graduation ceremonies. The guidance remains the same. I would encourage you to please refer to the formal guidance that is issued by the State Department of Health, the CDC, the governor's office in his Open Up and Recover Safely plan, and OSDE, and not to mention communications that are abounding right now from a lot of different organizations in Oklahoma. As such, in-person graduation ceremonies are not allowable until May 15th. As I stated last week, I strongly encourage you to wait until June the 1st for any in-person ceremonies. However, based on the unique capabilities of each district, if you have a ceremony between May 15th and June 1st, you must implement appropriate social distancing protocols, including keeping students and guests 6 feet apart and taking other precautions such as not sharing microphones and limiting student guests. I have seen some of the creative ways that you are accomplishing this, and I applaud you for doing a lot of planning to make this a special day. We know the schedules are different for all of our districts, and we understand a lot of the reasoning behind when you schedule these, but as a general rule of thumb, I just wanted to restate those things. Let's talk about a topic that's been in the news a little bit. That has also just been part of casual conversation and general conversation being tossed around between superintendents and different groups. I have heard some of that as well. So this is about uniform start date. There has certainly been a lot of conversations in recent days about the possibility of a uniform start date for districts statewide. As a result, I know many of you are already making changes to your calendar and even adopting alternative calendars to be prepared for the fall. And I applaud your efforts in this. At this time, however, there is no consensus or determination on a uniform start date. So please just let that go. There is a lot of things for you to worry about. This isn't one of them. Districts should be thinking about all possibilities for the fall semester, including how they will handle the possibility of intermittent quarantining throughout the year. Short of a significant change in the path of the virus, it is not expected that there will be another statewide school shutdown. But again, we are not making these decisions. The coronavirus will determine what our steps will be, and we will follow the science. And at that point, we're going to have a lot more data to be able to consider in making decisions. As a result, the State Department of Education is working on a guidance document and decision-making framework to assist districts in planning for these situations. We expect it to largely take the form of guidance and considerations that districts will want to include in their planning, as opposed to requirements of the state. Okay, now another important topic that I want to mention, and that is the survey, the end of year survey as it relates to distance learning. We need to learn from you. We need to learn from your experience, because we're about to make some key decisions, and your input is what will guide us in this. So in order to best prepare for the guidance and resources we are going to prepare, and how we may utilize some strategic investing in your students and in a potential state rate or a state contract in some ways, we want to know how things have gone, what you're using, and we would like you to send just one response per district on the end of year distance learning survey, which is right now in your inbox. In fact, I think we just sent it again today, this morning. That link is available, and it is also included in yesterday's admin newsletter if you can find that a little more easily. It is due by 9 o'clock this evening, and that's when we will lock it down. We have had, I believe, there were 420 some districts who started the survey. Not everyone has finished the survey. We do have about 300, maybe 350 districts who have completed the survey. So please do that. Just one per district again. I really appreciate it. All right, with that said, I want to just flip this now to you, and to hear some of the things that we can answer, as we know we are moving into a time where we're beginning to get a picture of our budget, both at the state level and then soon the release of funds and the ability to plan as you consider both CARES Act dollars as well as state appropriations. I will pause and let Carolyn or whomever is next in terms of looking at some of the chat.
Yes, Superintendent, I'm here. Would just encourage folks to put their questions, comments in the chat. I don't think that there's been, we've addressed many of these already just now this morning, or excuse me, not this morning, so far in the call.
Okay, yes.
Okay, here is one. Please share OSDE plans for schools that want to practice virtual and blended days. How will virtual days be handled or counted next fall?
I think we can speak generally to that, but we'll be very specific in the guidance for you. And that is, there's a lot of flexibility with this. Let me ask if we have, I want to ask from just a legal standpoint, perhaps, if Brad could speak to this.
Sure. I think I mentioned this at least a little bit last week, and that's that the virtual instructional days or blended days or regular instructional days, they should count all one and the same. I think we put out some earlier guidance in March and even before that about ensuring that equitable resources were available to all students. And I think we're going to be putting that guidance and more specifics out in those guidance documents. But generally speaking, the virtual instructional day should count just as any other instructional day.
Okay, does that help? I've heard of at least one district that is talking about having one day a week or one day every so often on a regular basis, where they will have a full virtual day as a way to keep the students accustomed to this and just making it part of what they do. So this is always an alternative, and just want to make sure that's clear.
Okay, Superintendent, we've gotten some questions about the CARES Act dollars, specifically an update on the application and when will districts start to receive their allocations.
All right. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but my understanding is that is coming any day with regard to the application. Who might be able to be a little bit more definitive? I hesitate right now on naming the day of the week because I'm not sure I have all of the details on when it's actually going to be released. Who can speak to that?
Superintendent, this is Monty. The application right now is being tested. So there's a good chance it'll be in production tomorrow and could be sent out on Friday. It looks very promising that the application for the CARES Act and the allocations will be released on Friday.
All right, hope that helps.
Okay, and then also along the lines of the CARES Act, is the only money that districts will receive going through the Title I formula? In other words, is the money that is coming through the Title I formula all that there is available?
No, there's not. There's more available. And in fact, there are several sources potentially. One would be the amount, a very good portion of the amount that is given to the state agency. And then there are, of course, the GEAR funds, which we know the governor has full discretion with, but I do anticipate there would be something. And then there seems to also be another avenue that was spoken of, and we're going to seek guidance on this to be sure, but there's a possibility of other federal dollars, CARES Act dollars, that could be reimbursing expenses. The example given to me was that if OSU had a student and they had to reimburse them because they couldn't use the particular fees that they had already been paid, then the district, because of a shutdown of their semester this spring, then those dollars could be reimbursable through these funds. And these funds are in the very high hundreds of millions of dollars and are required to be spent or drawn down by December 30th. So that is another area. We have not yet been given the go-ahead to tell districts that that could be a possibility, but I just want you to know it's something that we are going to explore. There was a reference to this made by the governor's office, but we want to make sure that that wasn't taken out of context or not intended as it read in the article. So.
Okay, we have several questions about when access to school buildings can open up. Two veins of questions, really. The first about when employees can be asked to come back to work, specifically 12-month employees or teachers, when can they have access to the building? And then separately, opening buildings for summer programs, can that begin on June 1?
Yes, I believe it should and could. We see that as a date that the governor is looking at a milestone to reassess and see if he can move the state into the next phase, which would give greater flexibility to the numbers of people gathering or the opening of different businesses, etc. And I think that's a pretty clear date where it would make sense, still using all of the CDC guidance and protocol for safety, of course. But that seems reasonable. Is there anyone else from our team that has anything to add to that?
Superintendent, I would just add the Oklahoma Open Safe Plan, or the hours plan, commonly referred to as phase 1, phase 2, with dates or goals with dates attached to it. that specify, particularly in phase 1, about schools remaining closed while we are in phase 1, and then a goal of May 15th for phase 2, and then go on from phase 3. So we can certainly link to that, but encourage paying attention to that as it continues to develop.
Thank you.
Okay, Superintendent, regarding graduation ceremonies, do you expect the department to issue any guidance on graduation ceremonies at a point in which that they would be allowable? And that's the question.
If you are looking at a traditional service, then that would depend on which phase we're in and what the group size for gatherings would be permitted under those different phases. I know the governor's been very clear that, and we support this idea that it's not a smart idea to bring a lot of people together, even outdoors, in the, until after June 1. But I would just continue to make every possible safety provision that you can, even when it does feel like there's an all clear or the ability to move forward. But please, I think people should make their plans to have their graduations either virtually, if they're doing that in May, or in person in June. I know there are some that are doing in person in May with some very careful restrictions, and that's possible for them because of the size, the smaller size of a district, where all the families are staying in their cars, and students are small in number and are quite separated on a large field. So again, please, I would just say we are not going to put out additional guidance. We've already addressed this. If you have questions about what you're planning, just contact the RAO that you're used to calling, or give us a call here. But we're happy to provide specific guidance to you, or be a sounding board as you think through it.
Okay, we had a number of questions about unemployment claims and fraudulent unemployment claims. Could you address that and what districts can do to be prepared for that and respond to that?
If you're referring to the fraudulent claims that are all across the state, and often these are claims that include an address that is maybe 10 years old. I know I am told I'm a victim of the same thing, and it was a 10-year or 12-year-old address or more. So this is something that we know many people are a part of. It's not just teachers, it's not just school personnel, it's all across the state and country. So if you do have this occur, there is a email where that is to be sent with the Attorney General's office for fraud. And I think there's also another step with the Unemployment Commission, who would be able to speak a little bit more specifically, maybe even put those in the chat, those details. But yes, yes.
I'm happy to post those in the chat and do that momentarily.
Yes, it is very unfortunate that those claims are being made, but that is something that we know this is the time we live in, and there's steps to go to register that so that ends there, and register that fraud.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions about the line item for textbooks and whether or not that was maintained in the state budget for this year. And then also, will there be flexibility in how those funds can be spent?
Yes, yes to all of that. And it is a line item that appears in the budget, and it was funded at $33 million the way it has been in the past. Carolyn, can you speak to any flexibility?
Yeah, there's an allowance for an application for flexibility from the State Board of Education already, and that process exists. So I think certainly the State Board will consider that flexibility, and maybe Brad would want to chime in. We haven't universally granted that flexibility at this point, but that could be a consideration down the road. Brad? Maybe?
Yeah, sorry, I was finishing up posting that information on the fraudulent or fictitious claims. I think everything you said is spot on there. There's currently a process in place, and whether that's another uniform granting of a waiver or consideration of that waiver is something that I think we will definitely be considering. But at this time, that process is in place, and we will take individual applications on those requests. But I would look for us to continue giving consideration to that.
Right.
Okay, and then any update on potential cuts to state aid for next school year?
Well, have you seen the budget? If you haven't, it is a cut to state aid that was moving through the process, and that cut is, I believe, is it 4.6%? Carolyn?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So yes, that was, where is that at this point? Has that gone passed all the way through yet, Carolyn?
It is not. The budget bill still has to be heard in the House, which I believe will happen tomorrow, and then signed by the governor. But the budget that has been introduced and has passed the Senate in agreement with the House included a percentage cut of 4.6% in the state funding formula.
Yes.
Okay, I had a question about emergency certification. Does the superintendent of a district or the teacher apply for the extension for emergency certification?
Well, that is a district determination if that individual is offered. With regard to the particulars, Brad, would you want to speak to that?
Sure. Sorry to jump in, but you got that one. Yeah, it is a district request on an individual basis. If they have the individual and meet the requirements that are set out in statute about not having other qualified applicants, then submit those to the Office of Teacher Certification. I believe they will be accepting those requests for the next school year, starting right around Memorial Day this year. And so those are individual requests, and staff are prepared to start taking those on or around that time.
Okay. Superintendent, could you speak to any funds that might be available to help parents afford internet or devices like hotspots or Chromebooks?
Yes, and the connectivity aspect is the aspect that we are really driving for with our proposal with the governor's GEAR funds. This is, again, a priority. I've mentioned this for at least a month or two, that we want to see any federal relief funds dedicated to having the kind of connectivity that lasts beyond this crisis. But for now, we know we need to have devices in the hands of our children and at home. They have to have that. So we're actually involved in conversation that is really creative with some of the a pilot that's happening. I think it's called data casting. I'm not sure if I've said that right, with our PBS towers. And Carolyn, can you speak to one of the other ideas that that's been proposed? And all of these are part of the initiative that we had been working on even before the pandemic with Secretary Ostro with the digital transformation funds, and pursuing grants that would also assist with this. We will be pursuing a federal grant from the U.S. Department of Education on the reimagining of schools that would have a component that you can apply for digital and rural connectivity as well. I think it's an interesting thing that you shared with me, Carolyn, in your conversations, and we might need Phil to jump on and remind us, the group that was talking with you, because I think we both forget the name.
Sure. It's an association of the telecommunications companies, like Cox and Hillary Communications, and some of those groups, or businesses rather, are a part of this association, and they have shared that they might have some other means for getting access to communities, and so we're looking forward to having additional conversations with them specifically, and this would be more relevant to areas where there are apartment complexes, but the ability to possibly put up a network within the complex as a whole instead of running individual lines to the different apartments, and that would be a more cost-effective way, and then just providing passwords to the folks that live there. So that's one idea that we hope maybe we can explore, that instead of having a hotspot or having an actual line run to a home, or this could even potentially be applicable to a neighborhood, might be able to do something along those lines where you would set up a wireless network. So we're trying to explore all options that might be available to us, and working hard to see what kind of rates or information that we can get back to you as you're looking to support your family.
And also, and thank you, Carolyn. Also, another thing, just to keep you a little abreast of some of the discussions that we're having. These are not things that are happening, but the discussions, just to keep this in mind, there is it's called data casting technology that has existed but has not been used right now. South Carolina Public TV, and we are working, our OETA is working with them to see how they are doing this. For those who are unfamiliar, it is data casting allows through the PBS towers, and Oklahoma has 18 across the state, to get at-home learning content to homes and without internet access. And this is something that we're looking at for one answer to closing the digital divide as well. It would be something that we would do in partnership with OETA and those towers, but it's just one layer, and it's going to take a lot of different ways to weave together an answer for everyone in the state. But this has to remain a priority to close the digital divide. I mean, for me, I believe this is as important as having, electricity, and we just assume everyone should have electricity or running water. This is just part of modern times and a part of a modern public education. And we want to see this all across the state and put technology in the hands of kids. So we're going to prioritize that in our spending and in our collaboration as well.
Okay, Superintendent, we had a question about whether or not districts can expect additional cuts in the spring. I suppose if there would be another failure or a possibility of under collection. I don't know that we have any information to share on that right now. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I guess the first question I have, and I don't see the comment, so I can't see which spring you're talking about. If you're referring to right now, that is covered, and we are fully funded through June 30th with last year's budget, and the amount that was under collected for 1017. Those funds looking to the future would be something that certainly all of you that are engaged in crystal ball, planning know that there are various indicators that you look at. Oil and gas is one. The ability to collect sales tax, other collections that could be under collecting. We don't know. Now, I have heard from as the public has been told, and that's how I've heard, that the legislative appropriation chairs seem optimistic about the following year. But we know that school people are some of the best at forecasting needs. And I think that it's always important in this environment where we have a lot of dynamic situations and variables, and we can all see what's happening with rig counts and oil per barrel, et cetera, that we are just bracing ourselves for a rocky year as well as the next. So that's all I can tell you right now. There's no way to have any kind of answer other than to speculate.
Sure. And we had a comment that there's a little bit of confusion about what schools should expect for the fall. Do they plan on students coming to campus? Do they plan for distance learning, or a little bit of both?
Well, if things look the way they do today, I would say, yes, we would expect that we are part of reopening, and that would be part of the plan. What we don't know yet is what occurs once everyone begins mixing. And it also depends on how well people are social distancing in these months leading up to the fall semester. We're going to have more data by the time July hits. So what I would recommend, and what will be part of the guidance that we will have as a framework with 7 or 8 different categories of focus. Those will have items in it that are like what to do now, what we could be doing now, what we do before school opens, and what do we do once we are in the traditional back to school model, when there might be an outbreak or an individual who is going to need to be quarantined, etc. And so that framework, we are engaged right now with a variety of stakeholders. Some of our membership partners, OSSBA and COSA, OPSRC, et cetera, are all part of that. And we're going to provide some kind of early information, truly a framework that will be built out over time, but that should be ready for you in the month of May. We are shooting for mid to late May, and want you to have that to be able to begin thinking through some considerations as you make your decisions and plans. One thing I think would be helpful that I am hearing other schools describe as they plan is they are building multiple calendars. And there is a calendar that they anticipate will be the one that they start back, that's a traditional start back. Or there could be another that would respond to an outbreak. When you think about the start date, I would also think to anticipate that, we do expect that there will be periods for some schools where they may need to close for a week or more. I don't know. But that kind of cushion is something that might be provided if a district decides to start a little bit earlier than they had in the past. But the other thing that should guide that is thinking about the loss of instruction, the unfinished learning, and strategies for helping students close that gap. And I don't think that we can expect that many students are going to be able to close that gap right away. It's going to take more than, the first semester. It's going to be something I think you all know that loss it could be a year or more of setback. I see somebody trying to talk about microphone. Is there any issue with you hearing me?
No, Superintendent, the question is about use of microphones at graduation ceremonies. And I think our mention of that was just to encourage you to really think about all aspects of your graduation ceremony and the possibility for how the virus might be spread. So I don't know that we have any specific recommendations on how you might remedy that issue, but just wanting to get you thinking about that.
Also, I see a question about transportation of students, and that is something that we are seeking guidance and will have included in our framework that we'll have coming soon. And that is something that we really want to think about. Public education meets public health, and this is all about working with our epidemiologist right here in the state, our lead epidemiologist. I was on the phone with him earlier today. They have a reopened team that's going to be working with our team, and we will have those kinds of really well thought through plans to give you guidance, things for you to consider, some very simple things to consider that I can give as examples. Do include buses and transportation, and how do we keep our kids safe on a bus with regard to this kind of concentration of students. But it may be that we change how we do our time in the cafeteria. It may not be wise to bring everyone into one big room, but it could be that you consider having breakfast in the classroom as well as lunch in the classroom. That's one example of a change. It's not going to prevent what we know is going to occur with some kind of cross contamination of virus spread when we bring students into buildings, but there are things we can do to minimize risk. And that's part of what the guidance that we would ask you to consider.
Okay, Superintendent, there's been some thought that with the federal stimulus money from the CARES Act, that would be able to cover the funding cuts through the state budget. Do you believe that to be the case, or have thoughts on how that could work?
Right. No, clearly that is not, it was, in fact, I've heard the chairs mention that it is not allowed to be a backfill, but we know you have flexibility, and we'll use those funds in a way that makes sense for your community in the midst of COVID-19. But you have hindered ability to use those funds if we did not have the cuts that have occurred due to the economic downturn that exists in our state. We are going to go after as many additional packages of support that we can, or grants that we can, and are looking to have a more coordinated effort. It does not benefit schools if you are trying to negotiate your own deals when we could do something statewide. And those are the kinds of ways we can stretch our dollars. The other would be if we are able to take advantage of some of these other funds that are meant for reimbursement of already expended unavoidable costs due to coronavirus, if that can be extended to school districts. I believe the total funds for that are somewhere in the 800 million.
Okay, Superintendent, we've had a couple of questions about whether or not we can expect to have testing next spring. So spring of 2021, do you expect state testing to resume?
Oh yes, we do expect that to resume. I do know that we were able to not have testing this year because we received a federal waiver. If there are no federal waivers, then there will be testing, and that's part of federal law. So we should plan on that, and this is something that every state, including Oklahoma, will see a decline in their achievement. We would expect that. What we can do, though, is try to mitigate that and lessen the loss.
Okay, maybe one final question here. Can you provide any update or guidance on ESY or extended school year? Can it occur in a virtual format? And that might be a question for perhaps Brad or Todd.
Yeah, I think we can speak to that. Brad, would you want to take it?
Sure, if Todd's on, you can jump in, certainly, but ESY services, or as Carolyn said, extended school year, I think they can occur virtually. In my mind, these services, instructional services, are going to be similar to the other instructional services that we've been talking about today, last week, and going forward. I think the short answer is yes, they can occur virtually, and we would encourage that to occur at this time. And as we move forward, we might consider and look at other possibilities to do that. But yes, virtually.
I saw that Todd was on now and able to speak. Todd, do you have anything to add?
No, but just that same thing. I mean, we need to be looking at how could ESY services being provided virtually. And then as we get updates from the state and all of that on, things might change, but ESY can definitely be provided virtually. IP team should just be looking at what were we currently providing on the IP and how will that look like now, and making any changes based on that.
Okay, I do see a question that someone's asking if the spring of 2021 testing would be establishing a new baseline. Please know that we are working with the technical advisory team and the Center for Assessments nationally. This is not an uncommon question, and it's one that every state is grappling with. So we'll have a solution that will be fair, valid, and reliable. But it will not be made by one person in this department. It will be made by a full team of technical experts that do this work, and we will lean on their advice on how to accomplish that. So I don't have an answer for you right now, but I just want to give you that assurance.
Sorry, yes, Superintendent, I think we've answered most all of the questions, and so we might give just another minute or two for any last minute thing to pop in the chat here.
And I'm seeing some questions that are the kinds of questions that we'll offer guidance on, but they're those kinds of questions that you could answer very creatively. And they're about, would you suggest reducing PE class sizes, music classes? I can suggest with music, for example, we would not want all of our students in the whole building going through one room. That is how you spread the virus. So it would be much smarter to find ways to minimize that kind of traffic where everyone is in that common area. And one way I have heard is for the music teacher to rotate instead of the students all coming in through that one place. Same thing would be with PE. We know that there are considerations related to the playground, not mixing classes and trying to keep those classrooms, particularly in elementary schools where they don't mix, to be held in as tight of a nucleus as possible throughout the day.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions here about driver's education, and of course we have released guidance on how that can be completed for the current school year. Nothing yet has been released for the summer, but we will certainly provide guidance on that in the coming days and weeks. But just as a reminder, the coursework, the 30 hours of coursework can be done virtually if you're able to do that. And then I know it's primarily the concern for the driving with an instructor. So we will kind of see how things go for the over the next several weeks as to whether or not that looks to be a possibility for the summer. So look for additional guidance to come on that. A question about having sports in the fall. Do you expect sports to resume?
That's a question that will be answered by David Jackson and his team at OSSAA and you. That is really, I mean, we are very happy to be a part of knowing what their thought process is. But again, we will underscore the need to follow the guidance that is going to be provided through our health departments. And I do know that I've heard in conversations with some who are on that board that they anticipate very specific guidance to be coming out, and we'll anticipate that in the next little bit of time. I know everyone wants that information right away. I know you're under a lot of pressure to have answers to that, and everybody wants to return to as great a level of normalcy as possible. We also just really want to be careful that we, it's not just about death counts and numbers hospitalized. When people get sick, there are some who have long-lasting illness and takes a dramatic amount of time for recovery. So I think we forget that even though others have got COVID and they've sailed through, there are some that didn't and spent a lot of time in hospitals. So we would, of course, hate to see more of that kind of suffering than is needed. But at the same time, I do expect that there will be a lot of pressure to find creative ways to bring the opportunity for sports back. But there's just got to have thoughtful consideration, even band, with how instruments are distributed and cleaned and cared for. So I would hope that they'll have that guidance first before the doors open.
Okay, Superintendent, I think we can wrap up.
All right, let me see if, and by the way, the average time on a ventilator is 15 days. And that's in ICU, touch and go, and not to mention the economic hit on those families. It can be devastating. We want to do the very best we can to soften any kind of blow that could occur to families. And with the ability for contact tracing in the future, we are going to be able to learn what event or what gathering contributed to an outbreak. And it's going to be a lot to bear if it occurred because we were rushing. And anyway, I know you all are thinking about all of that. And I know you're also working with school attorneys, and we appreciate all of that advice as well. You all are leaders who know your communities. You also can see what is happening in your community. So I think that making the most tailored approach is warranted, and yet we do have an open door for those who just want to run an idea our way. We'd be happy to be a thought partner with you on that before the guidance comes out. I see one more about the Reading Sufficiency Summer Academies, and we have had some talk around this. Not sure I have the latest. Would someone be able to address that?
Sure, I will do my best. I think one question that has come in is whether those academies can be conducted virtually, similar to the question we had on extended school year earlier. I think the answer again is yes, they can be conducted virtually, but those are going to be local determinations about how those best fit. One thing that I've seen as early as this morning and continuing to look at now, administrative rules require certain time periods for these academies. I believe it's 4 weeks, 4 hours, or up to half a day for 4 days a week. And so some of those things we were working through, and I anticipate we'll have answers to those soon. But I could just know that we are discussing those, looking at it, and answering these questions as soon as they come in, if we can.
And I appreciate that, Brad. Also, I see a final comment close to the end here from Jason Lindley. I'm just going to read your comment because I think it's really good. I think there is a concern that when we find solutions that they meet legal and policy expectations as well. Basically, we don't want to provide information to our patrons that may have to be extracted or changed after the fact. With virtual days counting in the future, how will those hours work, days and hours work? And I think those are two parts there, but I get that. And in the same way, we are going to provide some of this, early information so you can see what areas we're going to cover and try to think through. We'll rely on you also to help us if you've identified an area that we have not covered that needs to be, but we are working collaboratively with a group of stakeholders, again, with those health officials, those in public health, state epidemiologists, but we're also doing a lot of this work at a national level as well to look at how some of these scenarios are being addressed in other states, and pulling from what we think makes a lot of sense and could fit here, but that will not, when families talk, and I think the greatest struggle sometimes is when there's very wide ranging differences between communities in how things are approached. So I think the strategy we will have is a type of decision tree: when this, then that, or when this, consider this, this, this. And it will help have a more of a uniform approach, but the way you answer that could fit a little bit more tailored in your own communities. I hope that helps. All right, well, keep your questions coming. And gosh, I sure am tempted every single time we start to say, hey, you cool cats and kittens. But we're at the end now, so I don't know how that ends. But I just hope you guys are taking a little bit of time as the year now is winding down, but I know your time just really gets compressed. So take some time for just a little bit of self-care, if that's even something that any of you know how to do. And we need you refreshed, clear-headed, clear-eyed, and you know, celebrating with your graduates, answering lots of questions and decisions that you have to make, but feeling like you're part of this big effort to answer a lot of complex questions and build scenarios where we don't have all the answers yet. I think what our communities need is to know we are planning, and that we're not going to leave this to the last minute to decide, but that we have rock solid plans leading up so that we can appropriately respond to what we meet as we reopen schools. And I am just very grateful for each of you. I know it's going to be a year where there's a lot of juggling in terms of budget and lots of new things related to the CARES Act, but just know we are looking for ways to help support you financially as you support your students and those who serve in your schools. All right. Thanks, guys. Take care and have an awesome day. All right. Take care.